On today's episode of 6-8 Culture, our guest joins us from the remote reaches of northern Uganda. I'm prefacing this due to the subpar voice connection. Though the sound quality is very poor, his story is very rich. Have you ever paused and asked yourself, what is my life really about? Do I simply build a career, acquire a home, toys, vacations, retire, and then die? Today's guest has trod a path in life many of us may never contemplate, let alone initiate. His is one of incarnational living amongst the poor and sick, one of seeing blessing through the pain of suffering, and one of bringing the depths of justice, kindness, and humility to a world that mostly touches just a veneer of them. Stay tuned and embrace the poor sound quality as a crack that shines the bright light of what we will hear on today's episode of 6-8 Culture. Welcome to the 6-8 Culture Podcast, an international community where we share stories of transformation and restoration from the inside out, based on justice, kindness, and humility. Come journey with us. I'm your host, Rob McKinley. Lately, it seems like everything I believe is being called into question. Maybe you felt it too, that in the aftermath of these tumultuous times, how is it all going to add up? Is there a silver lining still unfolding, or am I merely fooling myself with facile positivity? Is our collective pain drawing us closer or driving us apart toward antipathy? Is my life an epitome of humanity, or is injustice in the world the corollary of my complicity? Especially when it comes to examples born under the banner of Christianity, I feel more distant than ever from my affiliation of faith to the elements of this epoch. I have always found myself in this cultural crossfire, not serious enough for the religious, while exiled from everybody else. It feels painfully personal when I see friends walk away from their faith on account of someone like me. Against a backdrop of right versus wrong, we have traded common ground to play God. We have become intellectual at examining the speck in someone else's life, while being insouciant to the stains in our own. We have made religion cheap as checkboxes in politics and principles we are against, while foregoing the cost of who we are for. Something I've always taken seriously from Scripture is how for all the incarnations Christ could embody, the choice disguise is in the margins of society. But that teaching is overly metaphoric for our sophisticated spirituality. Oh, come on, Jesus. That's such a nice thing to say, but you don't really mean that. It's just poetic. It's just rhetoric. How could the Almighty be seen as hungry? How could the infinite be seen as naked? That can't possibly be true religion, could it? It's easier to evangelize something more militant, like defending the Constitution and soul of a nation, than dwelling with the God in the margins of suffering. Some things need to be undone for everything else to add up. At the end, these remain: faith, hope, love. You and I aren't meant to be the answer. Our beliefs are better embodied than being explained. May we never miss the mystery of God's appearing behind the veil of suffering. And whether or not we believe in something bigger, may our love be like broken bread and justice roll down like water. These words were recently written by a former colleague of mine and friend who constantly inspires me to better living. Few people have I known that model the gentleness, humility, and wisdom as a follower of Jesus like him. Today's guest elected to live a life of simplicity. Though he's younger than me, I aspire to be more like him when I grow up. Jobin Sam, welcome to the 6-8 Culture Podcast.
Thank you so much, Rob. It's such an honor. So humbled by your words, brother. Reading everything that you just shared, I don't feel like I wrote that. It just feels like a prayer Doesn't feel poetry, it just feels like a prayer over these times, over my own journey. And I'm so humbled that you prayed that back over me.
When I read that, Jobin, it hit me like a ton of bricks right to the head. You have an uncanny knack of conveying not just really what I think, because I've seen the comments on many of your postings, what so many people here, especially in North America, resonate with. You're able to articulate in words what people's thoughts and feelings are. I'd like to introduce you to our guests. Jobin is joining us from the country of Uganda in the continent of Africa from far away. Late at night, we have a vast time difference between the two of us. So thanks so much for joining us on today's 6-8 Culture podcast, Jobin.
Thank you. It's a privilege and blessing to be here.
Yeah. So you and I, we met each other a few years ago, quite a few years ago in Ontario through World Vision Canada when we were both working for them. And we've maintained this connection through social media, connection of encouragement and mutual learnings. And I'm just so thankful for it. Now, a lot has changed those 7 or 8 or so years. So let's just start at the beginning. Can you share with us a little bit about Jobin Sam, your family, and maybe what makes you tick?
My family is my heart and soul, the heartbeat living outside of my own heart. I have a beloved wife and 2 kids, beautiful children, 4 and 5, but they're more like twins. Time at World Vision seems like a lifetime ago, even though it was just within this decade. It feels like a whole different lifetime because now we live here in northern Uganda, in a place where few feel called and even fewer come. We love the country of Uganda and we have people scattered all around the nation, but this is such a beautiful place and I feel like it's one of the secrets of East Africa. So I always pray that more people choose to come to places like this. We live in a rural village in northern Uganda and we've been here for the last 6 years, soon to be 7. And we came here just in blind faith. I'll get more into that later, but it was literally a one-way plane ticket, suitcases and surrender, not knowing what we were doing. But in the midst of all of this, we found God in the suffering. We found God in the hope and the struggle of the Acholi people. And what makes us keep going is the reality of the kingdom in the here and now. It doesn't look like a mega church. It doesn't look like a big conference or a big institution. It just seems like a small gathering of people under a tree or grass-thatched house with an elderly widow, but seeing God dwell in the suffering, God dwell in the margins. So that's what keeps us here.
So you mentioned you live in northern Uganda. There's quite a history in the country of Uganda. It's a rich and diverse place, and it's certainly seen more than its share of hardship with people like Idi Amin back in the 70s and early 80s, I believe. And then more recent times with the LRA and Joseph Kony, and I believe that it was northern Uganda that really was hit hardest with that. I've traveled in other countries that have seen more than their fair share of tragedy and horror, countries such as Cambodia and Laos, that the people are still living with terrible post-traumatic stress. What's the current state in the region that you are living in? I'm sure there's still many scars and remnants of what's been going on, but what are the remaining scars that are there, as well as the beauty that is rising up from the ashes?
Yeah, compared to the places that you just mentioned, brother, it feels like this place is overflowing with hope. We've seen a lot of NGOs who do rehabilitation and trauma counseling and focusing on the aftermath of the war. But the war was 20 years ago. And the people, the Acholi people here, are such a hopeful people. They're the living, breathing definition, embodiment of God making all things new. And even though people feel like it's an oppressive political climate, there's no hostility, there's no animosity between the tribes. People live in such harmony and hope. Idi Amin, Joseph Kony wasn't even captured, and people mention him here and there, but nobody gives a second thought. Nobody lives in fear or lives in the past. It's a beautiful example of all things being made new.
Wow.
And I'm not belittling what happened and the scars, because there are generations of children who've lost mothers and fathers, people who've lost their own lives because, they were child soldiers or they were used, the girls were abducted. So we have generations of missing people. But the families that live today amongst us, it's unbelievable how, and we hear the same stories coming out of Rwanda. It's unbelievable how the reconciliation is an example of the kingdom. No one's living in the past. People are all living today and for the future. We have maybe 80 or 90% of our friends or community, anyone who is my age and older, they were either abducted, they were either child soldiers or they were in the camp. But nobody lives in self-pity or nobody lives in brokenness. It's a beautiful example of hope to us, how the war was still so real, but you live in this community now. We drive through these dirt roads and it's hard to imagine that a war ever happened.
That's really refreshing to hear. It's actually wonderful to hear because we don't hear these stories on the news so often. What pervades the North American news is what political scandal is happening here. And for the most part, it's very much minutia. It has nothing to do with overall leadership and the direction our countries are taking. So when you hear stories of redemption and beauty after such horror and tragedy, these things need to be told. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, we're honored to be here because that's how Northern Uganda came to our radar. Joseph Kony, the LRA, and before that, Alice LaQuint, the predecessor to Joseph Kony. All of this came to our radar because of the Civil War. And it's a beautiful way how we came here expecting a war-torn nation. But it's not. Uganda is one of the economically advanced. It's growing at such a high rate in all the countries in East Africa and maybe Africa at large, even though the president has been in power for such a long time. And they see examples of revolution coming from the Arab countries, coming from Libya, coming from Zimbabwe. But the general consensus from our friends, brother, is how people just want peace. They don't want another revolution to overthrow a dictator. They've seen too much blood and they just want peace. So even the current president who's been in power for, I think, 30 or 40 years, even though, there are people across the spectrum who support him and who don't like him, by and large, people just want peace. They don't want transition from government, which will cause unrest to the country. So that, again, is just a beautiful depiction of how everyone is living in reconciliation. Even though the scars are real, people are choosing to live in healing.
Yeah. And the magnitude of that healing, I think here in North America, we can learn so much from that. Now, I know that COVID has had a really tragic effect with lockdown in many African nations. I was in Ethiopia in March, and I actually had to cut the trip short due to the lockdown, both here in Canada with them closing the borders, and people were really scrambling. And it's very different. Here in North America, we have the mantra of we're all in this together. And you see the Hollywood types and the celebrities, from their boats, on their yachts, eating their caviar. We're all in this together. Whereas that's not really an option for so many people in many African countries, in the majority of African countries. So how has COVID lockdown affected you there? And how has the actual sickness affected people, if you don't mind sharing that?
Yeah, so the outbreak really happened here in March, and that's when there were lots of flights coming in, international flights coming in, and the cases were rising. In the beginning, I think a lot of these countries in the sub-Saharan region, they felt a bit guarded because at the time it was Italy, it was the European countries that were badly affected, Iran, India was starting to happen, North America was starting to happen, but Africa seemed fine for a while. But when things took a turn for the worse, I can speak for Uganda that the president was very strict in his directives, completely locked down the country. And that meant no food rations that were coming in from Kenya, from Sudan, from these African nations. I think where we get most of our food on the shelves are coming from South Africa or Sudan or Kenya and Egypt. So the lockdown meant a lot of these food items were not reaching the grocery stores. So around March, April, May, in the beginning of the year, things were really tough, and people were more afraid that they would die of hunger than they would die of the disease. Thankfully, when the cases did rise here, it's a miracle, Rob. The fatality rate has been very low. So we always hear about people being infected, and we even think our neighbors had it, and we were the ones taking care of our neighbors. And it was all the flu symptoms, the cough, the headache, all these symptoms, and even no taste. One of my neighbors, he kept saying how, it's a funny story, we were actually eating jackfruit, the big, delicious fruit. It's all sticky. It's a lot of work to eat it. You have to get the fruit out of that thick skin, and then we're eating it, and all this work. And my neighbor, early 20s, and he goes, I'm just eating this, putting all this work, and I'm eating it, and I can't taste a single thing. And he's getting so frustrated, and he's like, let's put some sugar on the jackfruit. And I was laughing, like, this is already so sweet. This is a ripe jackfruit. And he kept, can't taste anything. I can't taste anything. And that's when it dawned on me, oh my gosh, people around us didn't know the symptoms. And I kept saying, oh, that could be an indication of corona, because that's one of the first symptoms that you will notice, that taste, the smell is gone.
Right.
And so it's crazy how I'm pretty sure even I was probably exposed, or I was asymptomatic, but it must be the grace of God that we haven't had a high fatality rate. And now I don't think we even pay attention to the numbers. The cases are rising every day, but people are okay, even though tragically there are a few elderly and vulnerable people who are dying. But it's nothing compared to what's happening in South Africa or India or all these other parts of the world. So we feel so thankful to be here, that it's actually safer. In the beginning, our parents wanted us to come back. They were freaking out, come back to Canada, go to Australia. But it would actually put us more at risk flying and going through these international hubs like Dubai or Amsterdam or anything. So the safest place to be, it was in the village.
Right.
And now there's food. Life has resumed back to normal. Things are coming in. People are also growing their own food. So there was no drought this season. So that's another miracle. So we've been able to cultivate beans and maize and all the staples. So thankfully there's food, and there's also food coming in from Kenya and Sudan and these other countries.
Wow. I know that the earlier stages of it, there were foreigners being targeted in some countries. I felt that a little bit myself when I was leaving from Ethiopia, and there were some attacks on some non-Ethiopians. Your family itself is a multicultural collection. Did you feel any oppression at all during those earlier times?
We did. There was a lot of name calling, and thankfully for us, it was just the name calling, but I know it got hostile in other parts of Uganda because we live in a pretty remote place. Even the population-wise, things are a bit more low-key here. But in the urban centers like Kampala, Jinja, all these other big places of Uganda, we heard some horror stories with some of the foreigners. But we just had name calling, so we got used to that. And that was only when we went to villages where people didn't know us. But for the most part, where we have relationship, we have journeyed alongside people in some villages where people have known us since our kids were babies. So there was no animosity there. And then the hostility all turned toward truck drivers. And I felt bad at the time, but it wasn't anything to do with foreigners. It was actually the people driving the food from places like Kenya and Congo, because the truck drivers were the ones bringing it from international borders. So for a while there, it was toward foreigners, but then it quickly changed toward these truck drivers who are kind of essential workers. And I feel bad for them. But now it's community spread is all over, and we think probably 70 or 80% of the population is probably exposed to it, but nobody gives it a second thought. People are still wearing masks. They're a bit more vigilant. There are, hand washing stations everywhere. Plenty of hand sanitizer. It was strange because when we first came to Uganda all those years ago, they would always look at us like, why we use hand sanitizers when we have kids with us before we eat, exposed to animals or different things. And now everyone knows hand sanitizers. It's sold everywhere. So people are a bit more vigilant, but at the same time, life just goes on. Everyone's back at work. People are in the fields. People are moving on public transport. So here, like everything is back to normal.
That's really good to hear. Really good to hear, because it must have been very concerning for you and your family for a while there. We're listening to Jobin Sam, who's joining us from the rural regions of northern Uganda. Let's continue as we hear him share on a potentially life-threatening situation diffused by the power of love and relationship.
There was one time where it got bad, like I mentioned, because we are in these different villages and we journey alongside different families that we've known for a while and we have a relationship with them. There was one time as a family, so wife and I and our 2 kids and along with the local pastor, we were distributing food, and this was early on before there was a lockdown. To get to these deep places, we have to pass these village centers, and the center is where the hub of activity is, where the marketplace is, and even a bit of drinking and socializing. And there was one time my wife was with the local pastor because I couldn't take the kids deep in the bush, so I had to stay in the car with the cargo because we have all these food parcels with us. And my wife and the local pastor walks on foot into the bush carrying the food, but I'm staying with my 2 kids in the car, and there was an angry mob who started shouting "Corona, Corona" at us, and I got really uncomfortable. I got scared for the kids because they were wondering what was going on. And it always happens where there's drinking. There was a bunch of men and they start to incite the crowd, especially this one guy, and he starts making it more hysterical. But it was beautiful how just as things were getting out of hand, someone who knew me, we were taking care of his family before the child that we were taking care of died. So that was 2-3 years ago, and we haven't been there since that child passed away. But the brother of that child came to my defense, and he came and he started calming the crowd down, saying, no, we know these people. They always come here. We know them. And they're helping take care of some of the children. And it was beautiful how I didn't have to defend myself, but someone from that community came to bat for us. But that was the last time I took my kids out. Even today, I was in a different village. But since then, because of the whole Corona situation, I've been going out by myself, and my kids are at home. Crazy story, Rob. We didn't even have little things like shampoo, soap. Coffee ran out a long time ago, and there was a time where we didn't have shampoo for a long time, and it felt like a whole year of not washing our hair. So things like that were the funny things, how you don't really care about food anymore. You just want to have clean hair. So there were times where it got pretty bad, and it's miraculous how we think we're addicted to coffee and we ran out of our rations. But we got hooked on lemongrass tea, which was growing locally. So then we switched from coffee to lemongrass tea. But it was this beautiful picture of how there's grace in everything. And we were being stripped of things that we thought we needed. But then we found better addictions. Does that make sense?
Yeah. As you're talking, different visions of the book, The Pilgrim's Progress, were coming to my mind at the Vanity Fair, and accusers and mobs and riots and things like that.
At us, it's like, God, like, I know what you're going through, but I'm taking care of you. And it was like when it's where we feel like heaven is giving us a wink.
You mentioned lemongrass tea. I had mentioned that I was recently in Ethiopia, and some of the more impoverished farmers, what they try to do, the ones that are farming coffee beans, they'll also sell coffee leaf tea. And I tried it, and I got to be honest, it was one of the most horrible things I've ever tried in my life. Do they drink that there in Uganda at all?
So coffee doesn't grow here. It grows in the mountains, which probably about 10 hours away.
Okay.
So we do coffee in the immediate vicinity, but tea is huge. So lemongrass tea was a beautiful remedy to our lack of coffee. You have to try it sometime. I'm sure you have. But if you ever go camping or if you ever run out of your coffee rations, it's a good plan B.
Okay, this is good to know. So thanks for sharing all of this, Jobin. And just while we're on it, personal testimonies can be some of the most transformative tools in making our world a better place. Now, I've seen so many different stories that you have been posting on your Facebook that have just got me right to the depths of my soul. These testimonials can help people not feeling quite so isolated in their pains and trials, can also give really good perspective on life. Can you maybe share a great life lesson or two that you've learned along the way during your time that you and your family have been in Uganda?
Yeah, we feel like we're still learning, and there's so much that we could choose from. Every day it feels like an invitation, a life lesson to something completely new. One thing we mentioned earlier in our talk is how we have found God dwelling in the margins. One thing that has completely rocked my faith, has rocked my philosophy, if you will, is how we make life so much about blessing, and we pursue blessing, and we seek convenience and comfort and prosperity. Blessing in that sense. But one thing eyes have been awakened to is how suffering has been this visceral invitation for us. It's like this arcathedral to God's presence, how God dwells both in the suffering and in the blessing. And I hadn't accepted that before. We make life so much about blessing, about praying and getting what you want. It's almost like this vending machine faith, this give and take.
Right. Yeah.
The exchange where it's really religion, like, we keep all these rules and it's about right versus wrong. But the gray area, the part that God has been drawing us into, is how suffering is not something that we shy away from. And that's been something that has rocked our faith, that's opened our eyes to see the beauty of the community around us. And even not just peripherally, but within our own family, the things that we've gone through week after week, month by month. We've had almost every tropical disease, especially when I see my wife go through things. There was one time my mom was visiting. I hope my mom doesn't listen to this. Was visiting. And she was so concerned for my wife, Francine, that she made us drive all the way to the capital city, 8 to 10 hours away, and we had ultrasound, and we went to 2 different hospitals, well-known, respected hospitals, just because we have limited access to healthcare where we are. And our parents get so worried, they get so concerned. My mom was thinking that this is not just any tropical disease, this is something much worse, the C word, I don't even want to mention it. Like, we've been through so many experiences where we felt like we've faced life and death scenarios. And then not just the physical side, but also the emotional side, because loneliness is so tethered to our journey, even though we have a beautiful community around us. And every day we're learning to live in that oneness. We have our Acholi brothers and sisters that we do life with. But sometimes, Rob, it can feel like, like walking down the middle of a crowded street, like being in New York City, surrounded by thousands of people, but you feel alone. Mm. Feels like that here, where we feel like we're surrounded by hundreds of people and people all around in the villages, but we still have this inner loneliness that we go through. So suffering, all of this, the emotional, the physical, all of this has drawn us spiritually to finding God. Like, how many times in scripture it says over and over again how Jesus is with the hungry, he's with the broken, that every disguise that he could choose, like you quoted in the beginning, every appearance that he could wear, he chooses the homeless, he chooses the hungry, he chooses the sick. Mm-hmm. So suffering has been this place where we find Jesus. This morning I was with 2 widows, 2 elderly widows, both of whom are blind. And one of them, we were actually together months ago, where she was bit by a snake. So imagine an elderly blind mother who is taking care of so many children that are sick, and she's bit by a snake. So we were really worried for them. But being with people like that, we are the ones who are learning who God is. We are the ones who are learning what faith really looks like. And I was with her today, and just the presence of God that I feel in a place like that, the presence of God I feel on a person like that, that's a daily invitation for us to find God in the suffering, different scenarios and different people around us. So yeah, that's something compared to my early 20s. I'm just coming to my mid-30s now, but I feel like that's changed the trajectory of how I view God, how I view life.
Many of us never even embark on that journey, Jobin. So thank you for sharing that. That could be very much a catalyst for many of us as a starting point.
even with what I've shared on Facebook to our friends, it keeps going about the same theme. And I feel like I'm sounding like a broken record. I need to stop posting things that are about suffering. There needs to be more lighthearted posts. So sometimes we are very reticent to share these thoughts just because it feels very heady and it feels very monotonous, like as if we can't talk about anything else. But we're not putting down the community around us. We're not saying that people are suffering, but we're just saying how we're seeing God.
Yeah.
Reality of heaven, the reality of the kingdom. And God is not like a Greek mythology God. God is not like Zeus. In the Christian faith, God is incarnated in Jesus. God is more like our neighbor, our enemy, more like the hungry. So that's something that's been rocking us.
And I don't find your posts heavy. I find them extremely introspective and always interlaced with hope. So there are some very tragic stories that you've shared, but there's always a redemptive quality of hope associated with them. We have enough of the ridiculous 20 million to 200 million views on Facebook of some pop artist. I am so thankful for the tethering of substance in so many of the things that you say, but they don't feel heavy. Even with the suffering, there's always that deeper meta-narrative of hope and joy beyond the immediate of what we see within that suffering.
Yeah, I'm so humbled, brother, because we are very careful and cautious about what we share, and that's the reason why we don't share for a long time. We don't post our life every day. This is what we ate. This is who we hung out with today.
Right.
That's why when we do share, it's more like our personal prayer. It's not meant to be poetry. It's not meant to be rhetoric. It's not just something that I'm trying to share publicly. It's more of my own journal entries.
That's how I think many others would read that. It really conveys, I think, a similar prayer and longing as well. If I can ask, Jobin, you and I met in Ontario. I think we met in the CAF at the World Vision Building, somewhere around there. But what took you from Ontario to Uganda? You have a wife with Australian nationality, and
That's right.
You have 2 kids. I don't know if they were both born in Uganda or not, but what brought you from this North American life to living in rural northern Uganda?
Oh, brother, I wish I had an answer for you. I'm still asking myself that question every day. It wasn't an overnight thing. It was these simple yeses that we have said over the course of our life. And northern Uganda wasn't the first place that we landed on. And before this, I was in India. I was in Kolkata. So it was just different yeses, these whispers that we've followed. It's not like we see a finger writing on the wall or we hear a loud voice from heaven. It's more of these whispers and saying yes, step by step. So northern Uganda was years of waiting and praying. My wife was actually praying about it since she was a teenager. So it was on her radar before it was on mine. And like I mentioned before this, I was in India. Before that, we were actually in Ethiopia as well when we were engaged. And different NGOs. I was in Kenya. Actually, my first time to the continent of Africa was 19. I was just fresh out of college. I was 19 or 20, and I came to Malawi. So it's not something that we just came here on a one-way plane ticket overnight. It was just these small yeses that we've had all along the journey. And just to give you some more context, brother, about our life here, we came here without any connections. We didn't even have any friends here. And we just knew this place on a map. Initially, we came to a different part of Uganda, and those were with some Canadian friends. So they came and picked us up from the airport. Beautiful friends of ours who have an amazing organization in a district about 10 hours away from us. And they are from the prairies. They're from Saskatchewan. We stayed with them for a month. They were kind of like our mom and dad. They showed us the ropes. But we knew this place, the district that we are in now. It's called Kitgum. We knew it on a map. We had never been here before. We didn't know anyone here. So we literally had our suitcases packed. They drove us up here and we just rented a room and stayed there for 2 weeks. And in those early days, we didn't know what we were doing. We had tears on our face because that was when I had just resigned from World Vision. And it was like we had left everything that we'd known. We had said goodbye to our families. And we came here not with any connection. all along, like Malawi, India, Kenya, all those places, there were these amazing organizations that I could come under. So there were safety nets and structures and staff. But coming here, there was none of that. We felt like stepping out of the boat completely into the unknown, no certitudes, no safety nets, no salaries. And that's kind of how we ended up here. Like I mentioned, it's these whispers that led us here. And when we came here, brother, that's when we found the plight of these children. It's a disease that only happens in this tribe, in all of Uganda, in all of East Africa. Actually, most of the research people have said that it only happens in this tribe in all of Africa. So it's a disease that's called nodding. Nodding as in how the children are always shaking, they're nodding their heads. They have episodes of epilepsy. So it's a disease that's kind of like the leprosy combined with epilepsy, combined with cancer in the sense that it's terminal, and it only affects children. So when we came here, we knew nothing about that. And like I mentioned before this, I was in India. And coming here, we realized soon that these are the untouchables of the Acholi tribe. Because India has, the caste system is so prevalent.
Yeah.
But here, even though there's none of that on paper, this disease, these are the modern day lepers of northern Uganda. So there's a disease that only affects kids. And the CDC, the WHO, all have done decades of research. They don't have a cause and they don't have a cure. So it's inconclusive, and all these children, thousands of these children in these districts in northern Uganda. And it's a disease that robs people of hope.
These children born with this, or is this contagious? Is it more genetic? Is it both?
It's contracted. So they're born completely beautiful, healthy children. But then the onset of the disease is between the ages of 3, early childhood, and then by 18, 19, before they reach adulthood, they pass away. So it's very much like leprosy, but it's also very physical, like it's not just a social disease because these children are kicked out of schools, they're tied down to trees, but it's also very much a physical thing because they're severely malnourished and they have sores and burns and infections on their body. So it's a combination of all these conditions, and we didn't know anything about it. And soon our friends, people that we met here, started telling us about nodding disease. And that's kind of how it came to our radar. And since then, we have met beautiful families and children that we have grown in deep relationship with them. Because, like I mentioned, we don't have an NGO or, a staff or a structure or anything. We're not coming at it with a flag. We're not flying any flag. We're not coming as an institution. We're not coming as a doctor or a researcher. We're literally coming there to spend time with them, and we go and spend the day with them. So like I mentioned, today I was in a distant village with 6 different families, and we go with food and medicine, the basic stuff. And it's completely antithetical to everything that I've been a part of coming from NGO world. Everything is sustainable. There's a developmental model to how things happen. So this is completely flipped upside down for us, because now we don't have any safety nets. We don't have any staff or structure. We're literally coming and walking and journeying alongside them. And because it's a disease that robs people of hope, we're literally journeying with them, to be there with them, to laugh and cry together. And it feels like we're just a Band-Aid. We're not doing anything big, brother. We're not making a difference. We're not changing these families' lives. We're just a Band-Aid. We're just trying to stop the bleeding. But because of the level of the suffering, because these children are so malnourished and taking things like epilepsy medicine, just the basic stuff, food, clothes, soap, different things like that, we're just a Band-Aid. And that's something that we've come to accept, that in this season of our life, we're completely on our own. We're just a family journeying with these other families that we've come to love. And we don't want to be an NGO. We don't want to be a church. We don't want to be the arm of a government or a university doing research, because these families have seen enough of that. But we want to just come alongside them, to laugh and cry together with them, to pray with them, to believe and hope with them. And in that sense, we feel like we don't want to be a surgeon. I'm not trying to change the disease. I'm just trying to stop the bleeding. With that said, I'm hopeful and I'm prayerful that there will be other institutions or people that come here who are much more qualified, resourceful than we are. Doctors would come and NGOs would come to figure out how to help these children with something that's more sustainable. It's weird to say this, but I've had to not think about my life as a sustainability equation. But it's more like how Jean Vanier put it, our life is just a sign. And we just want our life to be a sign of the world to come, a sign that hope is real, that they're not forgotten, they're not alone. So in that sense, our journey here is not sustainable by any means. We're not an NGO, we're not a developmental organization. Our life is just another family, just walking alongside them. And I pray that they see signs of God with them through our life.
It's incredible. It's different from the doing that we have all become so accustomed to, and entering the state of being, entering the state of the present, of the loving, and also factoring in that there will be others that will play their part, but this is the part that you've been given to play.
Sure, there are people who will come with the high level, with the macro level stuff, and they can scheme that behind glass doors and funding and resources and expertise. All that happens behind glass doors and conference rooms. We want to be on the ground and we want to be grassroots. And it's funny saying that. I hope none of our friends from World Vision listen to this, or Tear Fund, and even my mom works at an NGO. This is completely opposite, what we learn in international development or foreign policy.
Yeah.
This opposite that, and not to say that we will be here forever, but we're just a speck in the community here, and we just want to be here being present to the people around us. We are not even here on a humanitarian imperative or a religious dogma, none of that. We're just how it was described about the gospel. We're just one beggar telling another beggar where the bread is. And to that point, we just want our life to be a sign. We don't want it to be about sustainability. I don't want to scheme things and be worried about the macro level stuff. Yeah. I just want to pray that we'll come to do that.
So in terms of your own sustainability for your family, you're farming, you're spending time nourishing and loving these kids afflicted by this nodding disease. Do you have any ways of support for people that want to partner with the loving work that you're embodying there? Do you have any church or NGO affiliations at all that are saying, hey, we recognize the value of what you're doing and we want to walk alongside you and partner with you in this?
Yeah, we're so thankful for our community, Robert. We have friends from Toronto, from Canada, from different parts of the world that show us their love and support. And I don't care about the financial side. It's just our community is like our cloud of witnesses around us. Logistically, we are completely okay. We don't need funding. We don't need any of that stuff. We're just thankful to have this cloud of witnesses. We have an amazing church in Toronto that we were a part of, C3 Toronto, and they send us monthly support. And then it's my dad, and then friends from Canada, from different communities. But like I said, brother, money is the last thing on our mind. And if it was the pandemic, the best way people could support would just be to come, to hang out, to be present, because it's not an issue that funding can fix. But like I said, it's more like the families need someone to keep reminding them that they're not alone, that they're not forgotten, their suffering is seen, because they do feel ostracized by their own community because it's a disease, it's a social disease. It's kind of like the untouchables of India. So because it's a social disease like leprosy, we just want people who will come and touch them, hold them, be with them, and to help them feel seen and like a sign that God is near. So if it wasn't for the pandemic, my first ask would be, come on over, visit us.
If that clears up over the next little while and traveling restrictions are lifted, how far a drive are you from Kampala?
Ooh, it's long. It's a day's journey from the airport. From Kampala, I'm sure you could do it in 6 to 7 hours, but we've never been able to manage that. We have kids, and it's a day's journey from the airport.
Okay, that's good to know. I have connections in Kampala, and I'm sure there will be people listening on this podcast that have Ugandan connections. So if they want to pay you a visit, then they can know that. Another thing, Jobin, that I am constantly challenged by your postings, you have a gift in writing and you communicate with truth in both passion and a very compassionate way. I'd like to know, what writings are you drawn to? Where do you derive your inspiration? Is it from everyday living, which seems to be very apparent in your postings? Do you have any favorite authors or people that really inspire you?
First of all, brother, I don't consider myself a writer, and I'm humbled that you would say or even consider something like that of me. I never want to be an author. Many of my friends have kept hinting at the fact that because of these journal entries, and I feel like they're long-winded, they're essay-like journal entries, and that I should put it all into a book. But I don't want to be an author, only because I struggle with my life being known by my words. But everything that I'm writing, it's all lived. I want it to be about word made flesh. These are not things that are conjuring up in my mind. Like I mentioned, it's more like prayers. It's all word made flesh. I want it to be skin and bones of who I am. So I don't consider myself a writer, but the people that I do look up to are actually poets and prophets and musicians. Someone I've listened to for the longest time. And these are people who are poets, but they're more like underground poets, who are more like modern day prophets from the Bible. And musicians like Jason Upton or Rich Mullins, people in that vein. So musicians, John Foreman, but then some of the writers right now, I'm still reading Dostoevsky. I need to get through this book. I'm reading people like...
Which Dostoevsky book are you reading?
I'm reading The Brothers Karamazov.
That's a good 3-year read.
Yeah, how it's so heavy trying to get through it, but with the responsibilities of life and parenting, you don't get to it enough.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to read, but then all these people like Father Richard Rohr, and now because of Facebook and the time that I come on Facebook, I'm always inspired by brothers in the kingdom, brothers and sisters who are, raising the banner for justice today. So people like Otis Moss, there's a Father Tanner. There are these people who I'm inspired by their life because they embody justice. They embody worship, song, melody, hope. And these are the writings and the songs that I keep coming back to for my inspiration outside of scripture.
Do you have any current hurdles that you're facing, and how can people best support you and your family, whether that's through the material, through prayer, through words of encouragement? Are there any ways that they can reach out to you? What hurdles are you facing, and how can we best support you?
One of the biggest hurdles, it's always been the thorn in our side, has been loneliness. And the biggest way we would feel supported is just to have text messages and emails, phone calls like this, brother. This is what encourages us and shows us the nearness of God, that we're not somewhere halfway across the world, out of sight, out of mind. So our biggest thing that we need and we covet is community, prayer, messages. We're big on Facebook. I'm still old school. I do text messages and Facebook just because it's the only way we have to keep in touch with our community back home. So reaching out to us on Facebook, better than sending us $1 million.
Okay, that's good message. To know. Are you comfortable with people adding you to your Facebook if you don't know them yet?
Yeah, if I see we have mutual friends, then I understand that it's someone who have heard about us or who wants to reach out.
Sure.
These messages, these phone calls, that's why I'm saying in the beginning of our call, I mentioned to you, brother, how I feel so nervous to have a podcast. In my mind, I'm compartmentalizing it like it's not an official talk. I'm just chatting with you. So these chats, these phone calls are what encourages. And that's better than any material or financial, anything that the world could give us. But the relationship is what means the most to us.
Mm. As I'm talking with you, I'm thinking about my own life. And I think so often you hear the expression that people on their deathbed, they say, any regrets I have, I wish I didn't work so hard. I wish I embraced the important things of life and I spent more time with my family and showing compassion. And you're living that out now, preemptively before these deathbed regrets. Another posting you had mentioned said, there are only few things in life that are truly free, like the soil, the seed, and God's mercy. And I think that, in summary, really quantifies what you and your family are doing in your life, not just existing, but really living that life to the full. Do you have any parting words you'd like to share at all, Jobin, before we wrap things up?
Oh, brother, I'm so thankful to have talked to you, and it feels so humbling that you would call me and pursue to have this chat with me. Just share about that last thing that you just quoted. I really struggled with summing up that photo that day, that what I was going through. There are few things in life that are truly free. And I wanted to just speak on that, how the soil, the seed, I wasn't just talking about farmland. I wasn't just talking about the earth, but even I'm praying that my life, and that's my prayer, maybe for others too, that our life would be good soil, that our life would be like a seed. You know, we don't see the return today. We won't get to harvest the land today, but our life would be like good soil, that our life would be like the seed in the unseen, that it goes to the ground and it dies, but that's what brings life. So just on that last post, I wanted to share more thoughts about that. I didn't have the words then, I don't have it today, but I just wanted to reiterate that it wasn't just about that caption being about what we went through that day, going to the farm, but it's more like our life being a sign that it is good soil, especially in a time like today, where it seems like we have so many thorns and worries and division, polarizing opinions and right versus wrong. But I'm praying that our life would be like a seed that falls to the ground and dies, and we would be embodying a soil that brings life, that anything cultivating, anything will grow there. Hope, justice, everything grows in good soil. That's one thing that's beautiful about Uganda. The land is so fertile. Almost anything will grow if you tend to the garden. So I'm praying that our life would be good soil right now, where people are hurting and everyone is looking to each other. We don't know if we're for them or against them. I want to be in that place where there's mystery, where our life is just a sign. I'm not trying to be the answer. I'm not trying to embody anything that's being spoken. Our life is better embodied than being explained. So I'm not trying to be the answer. I'm just trying to be the sign. That's what I meant by, there are a few things in life that are like that. The soil, the seed, God's mercy.
Yeah, I think that sums it up really well. Jobin Sam, thank you so much for sharing your time with us and sharing some of your story, and for being such an example. To me personally, it's been said that when you encounter somebody and you just leave that room changed, you feel like a better person. You just want to be around them more. So if anything, this has been a catalyst for me to stay in even closer connection with you. Blessing upon blessing to you, my friend. Thanks for sharing your time with the 6-8 Culture podcast, where we share stories of personal transformation that are making our world a more just, kind, and humble place. Join us for our next session of impacting stories with 6-8 Culture. This is Rob McKinley signing out with a reminder for us all to act justly, to be kind, and to walk humbly.